A quiet kind of awareness begins to form when life stops feeling like it is constantly pushing forward and starts feeling like it is asking you to notice what is already here. In that stillness, people often reinterpret their longings, not as predictions or guarantees, but as emotional signals pointing toward connection, safety, and understanding. There is a sense that somewhere within human experience, two people can exist who do not require performance from each other, who do not demand explanation for every feeling, and who instead allow presence to speak more loudly than words. When someone imagines being deeply understood, it is less about destiny and more about the relief of not having to defend who they are. In that imagined space, conversations feel lighter, not because problems disappear, but because honesty does not feel dangerous. Even silence becomes part of communication, rather than an uncomfortable gap to fill. This is where emotional maturity begins to reshape desire itself, turning it from urgency into patience, from fear into openness. People start to realize that what they often call meant to be might simply be a connection that grows in an environment of trust rather than pressure. And in that realization, the heart is not promised perfection, but something quieter and more sustainable. The possibility of being met without having to shrink or exaggerate oneself. There is comfort in thinking that love, at its healthiest, does not rush or overwhelm, but unfolds gradually through consistent understanding, where two individuals learn each other's emotional language without force. In that unfolding, what matters most is not intensity, but steadiness, not certainty, but willingness. And so the idea of being deeply known becomes less about fate and more about readiness, less about waiting for something predetermined, and more about becoming open to what grows naturally, when fear is no longer leading the way. Before connection becomes something stable, there is often a long stretch of internal uncertainty where people question timing, choices, and even their own worthiness of love. During these phases, it is easy to interpret delays or emotional distance as rejection, when in reality, life is often shaping capacity rather than withholding outcomes. Emotional readiness is not a sudden arrival. It is built slowly through experience, reflection, and the gradual softening of defensive habits. People carry into relationships the weight of their past, and sometimes that weight makes even good intentions feel complicated. So what looks like waiting may actually be preparation, not punishment. In that preparation, individuals begin to understand what kind of presence they can offer and what kind of presence they need in return. It becomes less about finding someone who completes a narrative and more about learning how to show up without losing oneself. Within this shift, love is no longer imagined as something that fixes loneliness, but as something that requires responsibility, awareness, and emotional clarity. There is also a growing recognition that meaningful connection cannot thrive where fear is in control. Whether that fear is of abandonment, inadequacy, or vulnerability. As those fears surface, they are not necessarily signs of failure, but signs of areas that still need gentleness and time. And in that space, patience becomes more than waiting. It becomes participation in one's own growth. People often discover that the relationships they once thought were essential were actually reflections of where they were at that time, not final destinations. When those connections end or change, it can feel like loss, but it can also create space for deeper alignment later. Over time, what remains is not bitterness, but clarity about what emotional safety truly means. and how rare it is to feel it without having to constantly earn it. Clarity begins to replace confusion when emotional experiences are no longer interpreted through fear alone. Instead of seeing every setback as a sign of unworthiness, there is a shift toward understanding that not all connections are designed to last, even if they were meaningful in their own way. Some relationships arrive to teach boundaries, others to reveal emotional patterns, and some simply to help people recognize what they do not want to repeat. When those connections fade, it is easy to assume something was wrong with oneself, but with time, perspective softens that interpretation. What once felt like abandonment can later be understood as misalignment. In that understanding, the focus moves away from blaming and toward learning. People begin to notice that emotional depth is not always matched equally, and that love without mutual understanding eventually becomes heavy for both sides. There is also a growing awareness that genuine connection requires more than attraction or shared moments. It requires emotional responsibility, the ability to listen without defensiveness, and the willingness to grow alongside another person rather than trying to shape them. As these realizations settle, the idea of, quote, the right person becomes less about perfection and more about compatibility in values, communication, and emotional safety. Inkilube, Thumdo Mekshamskirsh. This does not remove longing, but it reshapes it into something more grounded. Ishamskirsh. Instead of searching for intensity, there is a quiet desire for consistency. Iggiv Ishamskirsh. Intik. Itums amanomanuomubat. Instead of searching for intensity, Taurus iggiv bat, zeha aza, the rismate deha, Adam mdom ma, bati budom, betekom du also batiha, betekom do bat, biksute, cha kombakshua, bikodlidhiti bikta me, irsit aza biasito, betetek kof, if During moments of emotional reflection, people often realize how much of their inner world has been shaped by protection rather than openness. Guarding the heart can feel necessary after disappointment, but over time, it can also create distance from the very experiences one hopes to receive. Slowly, there comes an awareness that healing is not about becoming someone entirely different, but about removing the tension that makes authenticity feel unsafe. In this process, the idea of being truly seen becomes less intimidating and more desirable. Being seen does not mean being exposed without care. It means being understood without having to constantly translate oneself. Many begin to notice that the deepest desire is not for admiration, but for ease, for a space where they do not have to edit their emotions or question their worth. At the same time, emotional growth brings a more realistic understanding of love. It is no longer imagined as something that arrives fully formed and flawless, but as something that develops through shared effort and mutual respect. There is also a quiet shift in how vulnerability is viewed. Instead of being perceived as risk alone, it becomes a bridge to deeper connection when met with the right kind of response. And yet, not every attempt at openness is received well, which reinforces the importance of discernment. Through experience, people learn that emotional safety cannot be assumed. It must be recognized in action, consistency, and care. As this understanding deepens, the longing for connection becomes less desperate and more intentional. It is no longer about filling emptiness, but about sharing fullness. And in that shift, the heart begins to settle into a more balanced rhythm. where hope is no longer fragile, but grounded in lived understanding of what healthy connection actually requires. There is a particular kind of emotional maturity that develops when someone stops chasing certainty and starts valuing alignment. In that stage, love is no longer seen as something that rescues, but as something that meets you where you already are. This perspective changes how people relate to timing, endings, and beginnings. Instead of asking why something did not last, they begin to ask what it revealed. Instead of assuming delay means denial, they consider that preparation might be unfolding in ways they cannot immediately see. This does not remove longing, but it removes panic from longing. It becomes possible to hold desire without being consumed by it. In this state, relationships are not evaluated by intensity alone, but by emotional safety, respect, and consistency. There is a growing appreciation for ordinary moments, shared silence without discomfort, conversations that do not require emotional armor, and presence that does not demand performance. These simple experiences often carry more weight than dramatic expressions of affection, because they create a foundation that does not collapse under pressure. Over time, people begin to understand that real connection is not about constant emotional highs, but about steady understanding that remains even when life becomes complicated. There is also a shift in self-perception. Instead of viewing oneself as waiting to be chosen, there is a recognition of being someone who also chooses. This mutuality changes everything, because it removes the imbalance of longing and replaces it with shared intention. And in that space, love becomes less about searching and more about recognizing when something feels safe enough to grow without force. It is not about perfection, but about resonance, where two lives can exist side by side without losing their individual grounding. Eventually, reflection leads to a quieter kind of acceptance, where the need to force outcomes begins to fade. People start to understand that meaningful connection cannot be rushed, because anything that is meant to last requires time to become stable. In that understanding, waiting is no longer seen as emptiness, but as space where personal growth and emotional clarity can unfold. Life experiences that once felt like setbacks begin to take on new meaning, revealing how they shaped resilience, boundaries, and emotional awareness. There is also a softer relationship with the past, where former connections are no longer viewed through regret alone, but through the lessons they carried. Each experience contributes to a deeper understanding of what feels right and what does not. Over time, emotional noise quiets, and what remains is a clearer sense of self. In that clarity, love is no longer imagined as something distant or idealized, but as something that could exist naturally when conditions are healthy and mutual. There is no longer a need to chase intensity or prove worthiness, only a willingness to remain open without losing grounding. And within that openness, the idea of connection becomes less about destiny and more about readiness meeting readiness. When two people are emotionally aligned, there is less confusion, less pressure, and more ease in simply being. That ease does not come from perfection, but from acceptance of each other's humanity, and so the journey inward becomes just as important as any external relationship, because it is within that inner stability that the capacity for genuine connection is built. It grows roots before showing branches. Your soulmate's prayer is not answered yet, because it is still being refined, not rejected, refined. I am aligning hearts, timing, courage, and healing. I am teaching both of you how to recognize peace when it finally stands in front of you. You are learning not to chase. They are learning not to hide. When these lessons meet, the answer will come naturally. My child, do not think for a moment that this prayer is one-sided. Your own tears, your own longing, your own whispered questions, they are part of the same conversation. Two hearts speaking to me separately, being prepared to speak to each other soon. I know you fear disappointment. I know you are scared to hope again. But hear me clearly now. I would not allow someone to pray for your hand if I did not intend to protect your heart. This love is not rushed. This marriage is not imagined. This connection is not accidental. It is forming in the unseen. Rest your heart tonight. You are being prayed for in ways you never knew, and this is only the beginning of what I am about to reveal to you. Before you ever noticed them, before you ever questioned the feeling in your chest that something unseen was moving toward you, they had already chosen you in their heart, and that is what I want you to understand now. Love does not always begin with touch. Sometimes it begins with recognition. Your soulmate did not fall for you because of proximity. They did not need constant conversations or shared memories to feel connected. They noticed something deeper, something most people overlook because they are too busy chasing excitement. They noticed your soul. They watched how you carried yourself when no one was rewarding you, how you stayed honest even when it cost you comfort, how you chose kindness when bitterness would have been easier. You do not realize how rare that is in a world that praises noise over depth. They saw the way you loved, quietly, sincerely, without keeping score, and that frightened them, because loving you did not feel like a game, it felt like a responsibility. They knew that to step toward you casually would be disrespectful. To approach you without intention would be dangerous. Not for you, but for them. Because once they allowed themselves to love you fully, there would be no turning back. That is why they chose prayer before pursuit. They said to me, God, I don't want to enter their life just to leave scars. If I come, let me come correctly. Do you understand what kind of heart speaks that way? This is not a love built on impulse. It is built on awareness. They noticed your silences. They noticed your emotional intelligence. They noticed how you listen more than you speak. They saw how you give people chances, not because they deserve them, but because you believe in growth. And instead of exploiting that softness, they respected it. They did not want to become another lesson in your life. That is why they kept distance. Not because they lacked feelings, but because they feared hurting you before they were ready to protect you. They knew they still carried parts of themselves that needed healing. Old fears, old habits, old insecurities. So they came to me. They prayed, God, remove what could harm them, even if it costs me time. My child, that prayer moved me deeply, because you have been wounded by people who wanted you before they were ready for you. People who liked the idea of you, but not the responsibility of loving you well. This soul is different. They chose you without touching you because they respected you before claiming you. They wanted to meet you as a whole person, not as someone still fighting their own shadows. While you were healing from past disappointments, they were doing the same. While you were learning to stop overgiving, they were learning to stop under-communicating. While you were learning boundaries, they were learning consistency. You were being aligned, even when you thought you were being delayed. There were moments when they almost reached out, almost spoke, almost stepped closer, but something inside them whispered, not yet. And that whisper was me. I was protecting both of you. You may not know this, but they often asked me about you, not for control, not for signs to manipulate, but for clarity. They asked me to show them how to love you in a way that feels safe, not overwhelming. They asked me to slow them down. That is rare. Most people pray for speed. They prayed for correctness. They did not want to impress you. They wanted to understand you. They wanted to know how to sit with your depth, how to honor your past without being threatened by it, how to walk beside you instead of ahead of you. They saw that your heart has been through too much to be handled carelessly. This is why their prayer is not about happiness alone. It is about stewardship. They asked me, God, if you allow me to marry them, teach me how to be gentle with what has been wounded. That is why I have been taking my time, because a soul that prays this way must be prepared properly. You wondered why connections around you felt shallow, why conversations lacked depth, why attraction faded quickly. It is because your spirit has already outgrown casual love, and so has theirs. That is why neither of you could settle. There are moments in life when everything appears fine on the outside, yet something inside quietly disagrees. Days move forward, conversations happen, responsibilities get handled, and still there is a subtle sense of incompleteness that is difficult to explain. It is not dramatic or loud. It shows up in pauses, in overthinking simple interactions, and in the way the heart doesn't fully settle into what the mind calls enough. Over time, this feeling can make a person question themselves, as if they are the problem for not feeling content with things that should technically be satisfying. But often, it is not about being difficult. It is about being aware enough to notice when something meaningful is missing, even if it has not yet taken shape clearly. There comes a stage where distractions, casual connections, or short-lived comfort no longer provide the same relief they once did. What used to feel exciting or soothing begins to feel repetitive and shallow. Conversations that once felt engaging now fade quickly. Situations that once brought excitement now feel like they are passing through without leaving anything behind. This shift can feel confusing because nothing externally seems wrong. Yet internally, the response has changed. It is as if the mind and heart have quietly outgrown certain patterns. In that space, silence becomes more noticeable, and the absence of depth becomes harder to ignore. The person begins to realize that they are not looking for more stimulation, but for something more stable, honest, and grounded. One of the most important emotional realizations is understanding that wanting something and being ready for it are not the same thing. It is possible to desire closeness, affection, or connection while still not being in a place to sustain it in a healthy way. Readiness involves emotional steadiness, self-awareness, and the ability to show up consistently without losing oneself in uncertainty. Wanting, on the other hand, can be immediate and intense, but not always stable. Over time, people begin to recognize that timing matters just as much as feeling. When readiness is missing, even strong emotions can become complicated. This awareness can create patience, not as a form of waiting helplessly, but as a form of respecting emotional development on both sides. Distance between two people is not always about rejection or loss. Sometimes it reflects a period of silence, where understanding has not yet fully formed. During such times, assumptions often try to fill the gap. The mind creates stories to explain absence, delay, or uncertainty. But silence itself can also serve a purpose. It reveals patterns, exposes expectations, and gives space for reflection that constant interaction might not allow. In that quiet, individuals often come face to face with their own emotional habits. They notice how they react to uncertainty, how they interpret space, and what they truly need in order to feel secure. Silence, while uncomfortable, can become a mirror that shows what presence alone sometimes hides. When feelings are unclear, the mind naturally tries to construct meaning. It builds narratives around people, moments, and emotions, often filling gaps with imagination. These internal stories can be comforting, but they are not always accurate. Love, in these mental constructions, may appear more certain or destined than it actually is in reality. Over time, it becomes important to recognize the difference between emotional interpretation and lived experience. Not every strong feeling is a guarantee of shared direction. Not every connection carries equal depth on both sides. Learning this distinction helps ground expectations and reduces emotional confusion. It allows people to appreciate reality as it is, rather than as the mind hopes it might be. A common emotional experience is the fear of entering someone's life while still feeling unfinished internally. This fear is not necessarily about inadequacy, but about responsibility. It reflects awareness that relationships can deeply affect another person's emotional well-being. When someone becomes more self-reflective, they may begin to question whether they are truly capable of offering stability, clarity, or consistency. This can lead to hesitation, not out of avoidance, but out of consideration. The idea of unintentionally causing hurt becomes more significant than the desire to rush into closeness. In this way, distance can sometimes be shaped by care rather than disinterest, even if it is not immediately understood that way. Self-reflection can be uncomfortable because it removes illusions of being fully ready or fully certain. It requires a person to acknowledge their emotional inconsistencies, unresolved experiences, and areas that still need growth. However, this honesty is also what creates maturity. When individuals stop pretending to be more prepared than they are, they begin to build a more stable foundation within themselves. This process is rarely linear. It involves moments of confidence followed by moments of doubt. But over time, it creates a clearer understanding of emotional limits and strengths. Honest reflection does not weaken connection potential. Instead, it prepares a person to engage with it more responsibly when the time is right. Emotional or physical distance is often interpreted as something negative, but it can also serve as a period of learning. In separation, individuals are given space to understand themselves without external influence shaping their responses too strongly. This space can reveal emotional dependency patterns, attachment styles, and personal needs that were previously overlooked. Instead of seeing distance as rejection, it can be understood as a pause that allows growth to happen independently. When viewed this way, distance becomes less about loss and more about preparation. It helps ensure that if connection is revisited later, it is done with more clarity and stability rather than confusion or urgency. Being chosen in a meaningful way is not about intensity alone. It is about consistency, clarity, and emotional responsibility. A gentle form of choosing someone does not rely on dramatic expression, but on steady presence and clear intention. It is the kind of connection where both individuals feel safe rather than uncertain, where effort is mutual rather than confusing. This type of emotional choice does not rush into labels or expectations. Instead, it builds gradually through trust and understanding. When people begin to recognize this difference, they start valuing stability over intensity and clarity over unpredictability. It shifts the focus from being desired in theory to being respected in reality. Confusion in emotional experiences often comes from mixed signals, unspoken expectations, or unclear timing. Over time, however, Clarity can emerge through experience, distance, and reflection. Clarity does not always bring immediate comfort, but it brings direction. It allows individuals to understand where they stand and what is realistically possible. When clarity enters a situation, emotional noise begins to reduce. Overthinking slows down, and assumptions lose their influence. This does not mean all feelings disappear, but they become more organized and grounded. Clarity helps people stop chasing uncertain outcomes and instead focus on what is actually present and mutual. One of the most challenging emotional lessons is accepting that meaningful connections cannot be forced into specific timelines. People often want answers quickly, wanting to know where something is heading or when it will develop. However, emotional readiness does not always align with urgency. Letting go of strict timelines allows experiences to unfold more naturally. It creates room for authenticity instead of pressure-driven decisions. When time is no longer treated as an enemy, relationships and personal growth both become more organic. This does not eliminate uncertainty, but it reduces unnecessary tension. It allows individuals to move at a pace that reflects reality rather than expectation. Personal growth is not only about self-improvement for its own sake, but also about becoming emotionally capable of sharing life with someone else in a healthy way. This involves learning communication, patience, emotional regulation, and accountability. It also involves understanding one's own patterns, triggers, and needs. Over time, a person begins to shift from seeking validation to building stability within themselves. This transformation is not about becoming perfect, but about becoming steady enough to participate in a shared emotional space without losing balance. When this happens, relationships become less about filling gaps and more about mutual support and understanding. Emotional maturity often develops quietly, without dramatic realization. It shows up in the way someone responds differently to situations they once found overwhelming. It appears in patience, where there was once urgency, and in reflection, where there was once impulsiveness. This shift is not about suppressing emotion, but about understanding it more clearly. A mature emotional state allows space for complexity without needing immediate resolution. It recognizes that feelings can exist without needing to be acted upon instantly. This quiet transformation often changes how people relate to others, making their connections more stable and thoughtful over time. Real commitment is not built on uncertainty or emotional guessing. It feels grounded, consistent, and clear. It does not rely on dramatic reassurance or constant questioning. Instead, it is reflected in actions that align with words over time. Commitment also includes responsibility, not just affection. It means being present, not only in easy moments, but also in complicated ones. When people begin to understand this, they stop romanticizing confusion and start valuing reliability. They realize that true emotional security does not create anxiety, it reduces it. In this way, commitment becomes less about intensity and more about steadiness. Love, when understood more softly, becomes less about prediction and more about presence. It is not something that needs to be forced into meaning or certainty before it has naturally formed. Instead, it is experienced through time, behavior, and shared understanding. A softer view of love allows space for imperfection without losing respect for oneself or others. It does not depend on grand assumptions about destiny or inevitability. Instead, it stays grounded in what is real, what is consistent, and what is mutual. In this approach, emotional peace becomes more important than emotional intensity, and understanding becomes more valuable than imagination. Top of form, bottom of form. I slowed certain paths. I closed certain doors. I deepened certain lessons, not to frustrate you, but to honor the seriousness of that prayer. While they were crying, you were probably going about your day, unaware, maybe tired, maybe distracted, maybe questioning me quietly. And yet, in the unseen, you were being defended by love you had not yet met fully. You were not forgotten, you were being protected. After that night, they became more careful with how they love. They stopped entertaining shallow connections. They withdrew from distractions. They chose solitude over noise, not because they lost hope, but because they found purpose. They knew now that when love arrives, it must be clean, not tangled with indecision, not mixed with ego, not driven by fear of loneliness. They were preparing themselves for you. And my child, you were doing the same. Even if you didn't realize it. You were learning when to walk away. You were learning to listen to your intuition. You were learning that peace matters more than chemistry. Both of you were being shaped in silence. The night they broke down was also the night I whispered back to them, not with promises, but with reassurance. I told them, if I place this love in your heart, I will not abandon it. That did not mean immediate union. It meant continued preparation. You see, some prayers are answered instantly. Others are answered intentionally. This one required alignment of timing, healing, and courage. It required both of you to become ready to receive what you were asking for. That is why the connection may feel close yet distant. Why signs appear but nothing rushes. Why your heart feels drawn but not anxious. These are signs of something being handled carefully. You are not being teased by destiny. You are being honored by it. Soon, the distance will begin to close, not dramatically, but naturally. Conversations will feel easier. Presence will feel more comfortable. The fear of vulnerability will soften into trust. And when you finally hear the truth behind their prayer, it will not overwhelm you. It will move you. Because the reason they want to marry you is not rooted in fantasy or fear of being alone. It is rooted in the desire to build something sacred, something protected, something real. This night of tears was not weakness. It was devotion forming. Rest in this truth, my child. Someone has already cried to me asking to love you correctly, and that kind of prayer does not go unanswered. There is something you have not been told yet, my child. Something your soulmate has kept locked deep inside their heart, even from themselves. It is the reason their prayers are so intense. It is the reason their tears fall without warning. It is the reason the thought of marrying you feels sacred, not casual. Their prayer is not only about love, it is about redemption. They carry a quiet regret, one they rarely speak about. In their past, they loved someone the wrong way, not because they intended harm, but because they did not yet understand what love truly requires. They were present in body, but absent in depth. They listened, but not fully. They cared, but not consciously. And when that connection ended, they realized something that shook them deeply. They realized that love can fail not because feelings disappear, but because responsibility was missing. That realization humbled them. Since then, they promised themselves they would never again enter a sacred bond carelessly, never again confuse attention with devotion, never again treat another heart as something to learn on. And then you came into their awareness. You appeared not as temptation, but as truth. They saw in you a soul that has already suffered enough from half-hearted love. They sensed that you are not someone who heals from words alone, but from deeply. What often looks like hesitation in another person can actually be the quiet pressure of responsibility forming inside them. There is a kind of love that doesn't intimidate them because of emotion itself, but because of what it demands to remain steady every single day. Being chosen consistently feels heavier than it appears from the outside, and within that weight, they begin to recognize their own unfinished parts. In that realization, they don't rush forward blindly. Instead, they slow down and turn inward, trying to understand whether they are truly capable of showing up in a way that does not break under pressure or repeat old patterns. Their thoughts become more reflective, almost prayerful in nature, not out of fear of love, but out of respect for what it requires. They begin to see commitment not as escape or comfort, but as responsibility that asks for honesty, patience, and emotional discipline. In that space, growth starts to matter more than reassurance, and becoming better becomes more important than being ready too soon. Even uncertainty turns into a place of learning rather than avoidance. There is a quiet shift happening where they no longer want to possess or control love, but to understand how to honor it without distortion. Every small moment of self-awareness adds to this internal change, shaping a more grounded version of themselves over time. What once felt like pressure slowly transforms into purpose, and what once felt like fear begins to look like readiness forming in real time. This unfolding is quiet but steady, shaping a more grounded capacity for love that does not rush, withdraw, or repeat past emotional cycles again eventually. Because the reason they want to marry you is not to complete themselves, but to commit themselves, to show up healed, present, and intentional. This is the kind of love that does not rush you. It meets you where you are and chooses you there. Be patient, my child. The love approaching you is not running late. It is arriving ready. Now listen closely, my child, because this is where everything comes together. There is a moment approaching, quiet, unannounced, and gentle, when the prayer your soulmate has been whispering will finally reach its fulfillment. Not because time has passed, but because both hearts are ready. You have wondered why your heart has been changing lately, why you no longer crave intensity, but peace, why drama feels exhausting instead of exciting, why your spirit now pauses before attachment. That is not coincidence. That is preparation. Your soulmate has been praying not only for the chance to marry you, but for the strength to love you after the ceremony, when reality begins, when patience matters more than passion, when daily choices define devotion. They told me, God, I want to be the place they rest, not another battle they fight. My child, love like that is rare. They are not dreaming about a perfect life with you. They are praying for a faithful life with you. One where misunderstandings are handled gently, where silence is not abandonment, where love is shown even on ordinary days. They want to marry you because they see forever not as a fantasy, but as responsibility repeated daily. And I want you to know something now that you have never been told before. The reason will touch your soul because it mirrors your own deepest longing. You have always wanted a love that feels safe, a partner who sees your emotions not as weakness, but as depth, someone who stays present when things are uncomfortable, someone who does not leave when growth is required. Their prayer carries that same desire, That is why I allowed their heart to find yours before their hands ever could. When the moment comes, when paths finally cross clearly, when conversations flow without effort, when recognition settles into certainty, you will feel something different. You will not feel overwhelmed. You will feel home. There will be no confusion about intention, no guessing games, no emotional imbalance. The connection will feel steady, grounded, and sincere, because this love was not rushed into existence. It was built in prayer. And when they finally speak openly to you, when they tell you why they waited, why they prayed, why they wanted marriage instead of moments, you will understand why every delay, every closed door, every lonely season mattered. It was shaping a love that could last. I know you have questioned me. I know there were days you felt unseen, unchosen, and forgotten. But I was watching over something too precious to mishandle. I was guarding your heart, and I was refining theirs. The union ahead is not about luck. It is about alignment. You are not meeting someone who will try to love you. You are meeting someone who has already practiced loving you, in prayer, in patience, in preparation. So release the fear now. Release the doubt. The soulmate who is praying to marry you is not asking for permission to take your life lightly. They are asking for the honor of walking beside you with intention, humility, and devotion. And when you finally stand together, hand in hand, heart to heart, you will know, this love did not arrive suddenly. It arrived correctly. Rest now, my child. What has been prayed for with sincerity is already on its way. Come closer, my child, and stay with me a little longer, because even after everything you have heard, there is still more unfolding beneath the surface, more truth, more tenderness, more purpose than your heart has yet been able to hold. You see, when your soulmate prays to marry you, they are not only thinking about a future moment, they are thinking about every ordinary day that comes after, the mornings when nothing special happens, the evenings when life feels heavy, the seasons when love must be chosen, not felt. That is where their prayer goes deepest. They have imagined sitting beside you in silence, not needing to fill it with words. They have imagined holding your hand when you are tired, not knowing how to fix things but staying anyway. They have imagined standing up for you when you are not in the room, protecting your name, your dignity, your heart. They pray, God, teach me how to stay, because they know staying is harder than arriving. Many people want the beginning, the excitement, the attention, the story, but your soulmate wants the middle and the end. They want the chapters that require endurance, humility, and forgiveness. They want the life where love becomes action. They have seen how easily people walk away when things become uncomfortable. They have watched relationships break not because love was gone, but because patience was missing, and something inside them said, I don't want that kind of love. So when they pray about marrying you, they are asking me to anchor them. They ask me to steady their emotions, so they do not react from fear. They ask me to sharpen their listening, so they hear what you are saying beneath your words. They ask me to soften their pride, so apologies come easily and sincerely. They know marriage is not about winning arguments. It is about protecting connection. My child, there is a reason your heart has always been sensitive to energy. A reason you can feel when something is off, even if no one says it. A reason superficial affection never satisfied you for long. You were created for a love that is aware. Your soulmate feels that too. They feel the weight of loving someone who sees deeply. And instead of feeling threatened by that depth, they are learning to rise to it. That is why they pray so often, in moments of self-doubt. They say, "God, I know they deserve consistency. Teach me how to give it." And I smile at that prayer. Consistency is not something people are born with. It is something they return to, choose, and rebuild through awareness and intention. In the space between doubt and desire, your soulmate has had moments of questioning their worthiness, moments where they wondered whether they could truly be the kind of partner you deserve. At times, they even considered stepping away before anything fully began, not because the feeling was absent, but because it felt too significant to handle lightly. Yet each time uncertainty rose, something deeper brought them back to the same realization. They do not want a love that is merely convenient or easy to walk away from. They want something aligned, something steady, something that asks them to grow rather than escape. In subtle ways, your presence has already influenced this evolution, not through force, but through example, through the way you carry integrity, emotional clarity, and quiet resilience. These qualities have quietly challenged them to re-examine how they show up in love and in life. It has become less about perfection and more about becoming emotionally available, grounded, and honest. They hope to meet you as someone who can stand beside you without feeling diminished by your light, someone who can support your direction without competing with it. In their inner world, there is a constant prayer for stability of character, for the ability to love without fear or withdrawal, and for the courage to remain present even when emotions feel overwhelming. Growth, for them, is no longer abstract. It is becoming a lived commitment. Each step forward feels less like pressure and more like alignment with who they are becoming. That is why I listen closely. You may have thought your waiting meant something was wrong, but waiting, my child, was evidence that something was being done properly. If this love had come earlier, it might have been intense but unstable. If it had arrived later, it might have been safe but distant. The timing unfolding now is balancing both depth and readiness. Nothing about this is accidental. Even the moments you felt lonely served a purpose. They taught you self-respect. They taught you discernment. They taught you that your heart is not something to hand over carelessly. Your soulmate learned the same lessons, just in different ways. And now, both of you are standing at the edge of something sacred. Do not rush your heart ahead of your season. Do not doubt what is being aligned quietly. What has been prayed for with sincerity, patience, and humility is approaching with the same qualities. Soon, love will feel less like longing and more like recognition. And when that happens, you will not need reassurance from the world. Your soul will say, "This is why I waited. Rest now, my child." The prayer to marry you was not spoken lightly. It was spoken with reverence, and reverent prayers are never ignored. Be still with me, my child, because what I am about to reveal now is deeper than longing, deeper than waiting, deeper even than the prayers you have already heard. There is a reason this love has unfolded in layers. You see, when your soulmate prays to marry you, they are not asking me to give them a person. They are asking me to entrust them with a life, your heart, your future days and nights, your joys and your wounds. And that awareness humbles them more than you know. They understand something many people never stop to consider, that marriage is not about finding someone who makes you happy all the time. It is about choosing someone whose pain you are willing to understand, whose fears you are willing to hold gently, whose growth you are willing to walk through patiently. That is why their prayers have grown quieter, not louder. At first, they prayed with urgency, with questions, with emotion that spilled out in tears. But now, their prayers have softened into surrender. They say less, but they mean more. They no longer beg me to hurry things. Instead, they ask me to shape them. They pray, God, if I am going to love them for a lifetime, teach me how to love them on days when I feel empty. My child, this is where love becomes holy. Because anyone can love when their cup is full. But loving when you are tired, uncertain, or stretched, that requires something deeper than feeling. That requires character. Your soulmate has been learning that. They have been facing parts of themselves they once avoided. Old patterns of running away from discomfort. Old fears of not being enough. Old habits of shutting down instead of speaking honestly. And each time those patterns rise, they bring them to me. They do not want to bring unfinished wounds into your life. They know you have carried enough already. You may not realize this, but there have been moments when your soulmate felt the pull to reach out sooner. Moments when they almost crossed the distance between you. But something inside them stopped. Not fear, but respect. They did not want to meet you halfway. They wanted to meet you whole. And while they were doing this inner work, you were changing too. You stopped chasing explanations. You stopped settling for mixed signals. You stopped romanticizing potential over consistency. Your heart began craving something calmer, steadier, more grounded. You started valuing peace more than excitement, clarity more than chemistry alone. That shift did not happen by accident. It happened because you were being prepared to recognize the love that is coming. The love approaching you will not arrive with chaos. It will not leave you guessing. It will not awaken old anxieties. Instead, it will feel like relief, like exhaling after holding your breath for too long. And when you feel that calm, you might question it at first. You might think, why doesn't this feel dramatic? But that is because drama is not depth. Safety is. Your soulmate understands this now. That is why their prayers have changed. They no longer ask me to make you fall for them. They ask me to help them show up in a way that makes falling unnecessary, because trust will already be there. They pray, God, let my presence feel like home to them. My child, do you know how rare that is? Most people want to be desired. They want to be admired. They want to be chosen. Your soulmate wants to be trusted. They want you to feel safe enough to be yourself completely, to laugh freely, to cry without fear of being misunderstood, to speak your truth without worrying it will be used against you later. They know your heart is not loud, it is deep, and deep hearts need gentle hands. That is why I have been teaching them patience, teaching them how to listen without interrupting, teaching them how to stay present without trying to fix everything, teaching them that sometimes love means simply sitting beside someone and saying, I'm here. At the same time, I have been teaching you discernment. I have been showing you the difference between attention and intention, between someone who wants access to you and someone who wants responsibility for you, between attraction that excites and love that sustains. You have learned that not everyone who feels right is meant to stay, but this one is different. When a connection is meant to mature, it rarely announces itself loudly. Instead, it unfolds in quieter shifts that are felt more than they are spoken. It begins to move from questioning into knowing, not through certainty of events, but through certainty of feeling. There is a gentler rhythm that emerges, where the need to chase answers dissolves into a calmer acceptance of timing. In that space, love is no longer measured by urgency, but by steadiness, by how it holds through silence and presence. What once felt like waiting begins to feel like preparation, as if life is quietly arranging readiness on both sides. Even uncertainty starts to soften, not because answers have fully arrived, but because trust begins to take up more space. Small moments begin to carry meaning that was previously overlooked, like conversations feeling easier or silence feeling less heavy. There is no rush in this unfolding, only a steady movement toward emotional alignment that cannot be easily forced. And even the heart, which once resisted uncertainty, begins to rest in what it cannot yet fully explain. This is not a conclusion arriving suddenly, but a gradual settling into emotional safety and mutual understanding that grows quietly over time. When it finally feels right, it does not feel like surprise, but like recognition that has been slowly forming all along. In that moment, fear loses its intensity, not because challenges vanish, but because both hearts feel equipped to navigate them together. Even then, what is unfolding carries a sense of quiet honor rather than pressure, as two people learn to meet each other with steadiness, care, and a readiness that does not demand perfection any longer. Because someone did not just ask me for you, they asked me how to love you well. Rest now, my child. What is approaching you was not built in haste, it was built in reverence, and reverent love lasts. Come now, my child, this is the closing of the circle, not an ending, but a settling, a gentle landing of everything that has been forming quietly around you for so long. I want you to breathe as you read this, because the season you are stepping into is not loud, it is assured. You have spent years learning, unlearning, healing, and waiting. You did not waste that time. You were not being tested without reason. Every delay refined your discernment. Every disappointment sharpened your wisdom. Every quiet night taught your heart what it truly needs. And now, you are ready in a way you were not before. So is your soulmate. The prayers they whispered are no longer filled with fear. They are filled with trust. They no longer ask me if this love will work. They ask me how to protect it. That shift matters. Because love that asks, will it last, is still uncertain. Love that asks, how do I care for it, is already committed. Your soulmate understands now that marriage is not a reward for finding the right person. It is a responsibility to become the right partner, again and again, through seasons that change and challenges that arise. They are not walking toward you with expectations. They are walking toward you with intention. They know you are not perfect, and they are not asking you to be. They are choosing you knowing there will be moments of misunderstanding, moments of silence, moments of growth that stretch both of you, and still, they are choosing you. That is what makes this love different. You will feel it when it arrives, not as fireworks, but as calm certainty, as emotional safety, as a sense that you no longer need to explain yourself or perform to be valued. You will notice how your body relaxes around them, how your thoughts slow down, how your heart feels steady instead of guarded. That is not coincidence. That is recognition. This love will not awaken your past wounds. It will soothe them. It will not demand you prove your worth. It will affirm it. It will not rush your healing. It will respect it. And your soulmate will finally understand why they had to pray first. Because loving you requires presence. It requires patience. It requires emotional maturity. and now they are capable of that. I know you once wondered if love would ever choose you with the same depth you give, if someone would ever see your heart and not feel intimidated by it, if someone would ever stay consistent without being reminded. That wondering ends here, because the person approaching you is not guessing about you. They are sure. They are not entering your life to experiment. They are entering with clarity, with respect, with the quiet confidence of someone who knows they have waited for the right reason. And you, my child, will not have to chase this love. It will meet you. Evenly, the idea of connection begins to feel less like a chase and more like a rhythm that two people create when they're genuinely aligned. In that kind of dynamic, conversations don't need to be forced into meaning. They unfold naturally, carrying ease instead of pressure. Silence doesn't feel like emptiness to fill, but like a shared space where neither person is performing or retreating. Even disagreements, which once might have felt like cracks forming, become moments where understanding is practiced rather than abandoned. There is a difference between intensity and stability, and what grows in this space is the quieter kind that doesn't constantly demand proof of itself. Growth, in its healthiest form, stops feeling like something you do alone while hoping the other person catches up. It becomes something experienced side by side, even if imperfectly paced. A relationship like this doesn't subtract from your identity or shrink your world. It expands your capacity to remain yourself while being close to someone else. And with that realization, fear begins to loosen its grip. The habit of preparing for disappointment starts to lose relevance, not because uncertainty disappears, but because presence becomes more valuable than prediction. Instead of rehearsing endings, attention returns to what is actually happening in real time. How you speak, how you listen, how you show up. Trust in this sense is not blind certainty. It is the willingness to stay engaged without constantly imagining collapse. When connection is healthy, it doesn't require self-abandonment or emotional overextension. It asks for honesty, consistency, and mutual care. Over time, what once felt like something to secure begins to feel like something to nurture. And that shift changes everything about how love is experienced, making it less about urgency and more about steadiness that can be built day by day.